Hello, welcome back to the brand new session of Certified Ethical Hacking Program. And now we are going to discuss module number 5, vulnerabilities and analysis. So in today's world, organizations depends heavily on information technology for protecting vital information. So this information is associated with areas of finance, research and development, personal, legality and security. So vulnerability assessments scan networks for known security weakness. So attackers perform vulnerability analysis to identify security loopholes in the target organization network, communication infrastructure, and systems. So the identified vulnerabilities are used by attackers to further exploit that target network. So, vulnerability assessment plays a major role in providing security to any organization's resources and infrastructure from various internal and external threats. To secure a network, the administrator needs to perform patch management, install proper antivirus software, check configurations, solve known issues in third-party application, and troubleshoot hardware with the default configurations. So all these activities together constitutive a vulnerability assessment. So this module starts with an introduction to vulnerability assessment concept. Then it also discusses the various vulnerability scoring system, vulnerability database, management lifecycle, and various approaches and tools used to perform vulnerability assessment. This module will also provide the knowledge about the tools and techniques used by the attackers to perform a quality vulnerability analysis, and it concludes with the analysis of the vulnerability assessments reports that can help the ethical hacker to fix the identified vulnerabilities. So the first topic is, what is vulnerability? So the vulnerability refers to the weakness in the design or implementation of the system that can be exploited to compromise the security of the system. So it is frequently a security loophole that enables an attacker to enter the system by passing user authentication. So there are generally two main causes for vulnerable system in the network: software or maybe hardware misconfiguration and poor programming practices. So attackers exploit these vulnerabilities to perform various types of attacks on organizational resources. So there are some common reasons for the existence of vulnerabilities. The first is hardware or software misconfiguration, maybe the insecure or poor design of the network and applications. Then the third will be inherent in technology weakness, then end user carelessness, intentionally end user acts. So yes, these are some examples of vulnerabilities which I have added in my slides. So you can see that TCP/IP protocol vulnerabilities, as we discussed in the earlier module, operating system vulnerabilities, network devices vulnerabilities, user account vulnerabilities, system accounts, internet service default passwords, then network device misconfiguration vulnerabilities should be there. So these kind of vulnerabilities which we need to just keep in our mind. So the next point is vulnerability research, which is the process of analyzing protocols, services, and configurations to discover the vulnerabilities and design flaws that will expose an operating systems and its application to exploit, attack, or misuse. So this is the vulnerability research. Please make sure that the ethical hacker needs to keep up with the most recent discovery vulnerabilities and exploits to stay one step ahead of attackers through vulnerability research, which include discovering the system design faults and weakness that might allow attackers to compromise the system, then staying updated about the new products and technologies and reading news related to the current exploits, then checking underground hacking websites for newly discovered vulnerabilities and exploits, then checking newly released alerts regarding relevant innovations and product improvements for security systems, and so on. So there are a lot of things which ethical hacker needs to keep up with the most recent discovery vulnerabilities. Then yes, resources for vulnerability research. So there are some tools which I have mentioned in my slide, that Microsoft Security Response Center. This investigate all reports of security vulnerabilities affecting Microsoft products and services, and it provides information as a part of an ongoing effort to help security professionals manage security risk and keep organizational system protected. Then you will also have a look into the slide that packets from dark reading, trend micro, security magazines, pen test magazine, SC magazines, exploit database, HelpNet Security, HackerStorm, Computer World, Decrypt. So there are a lot of tools which you can use to scan these particular to resource, right, to get some resource for vulnerability research. Then the next question came in our mind that what is vulnerability assessment, right? So the vulnerability assessment is an in-depth examination of the ability of a system or application, including current security procedures and control, to withstand exploitation. So it scans networks for known security weakness and recognize measures and classifies security vulnerabilities in the computer systems, maybe networks, maybe communication channels. So it identifies, quantifies, and ranks possible vulnerabilities to threats in a system. And yep, additionally, it assists security professional in securing the network by identifying security loopholes or vulnerabilities in the current security mechanism before attackers can exploit them. Right, so the vulnerability assessment may be used to identify weakness that could be exploited, maybe predict the effectiveness of additional security measures in protecting information resource from the attack. Then the next point is vulnerability scoring systems and database. So due to the growing severity of cyber attacks, vulnerabilities research has become critical as it helps to mitigate the chance of attacks. So vulnerability research provides the awareness of advanced techniques to identify flaws or loopholes in the software that can be exploited by attackers. So vulnerability scoring systems and vulnerability database are used by security analysts to rank information system vulnerabilities and to provide a composite score of the overall severity and you can say risk associated with the identified vulnerabilities. So vulnerability database collect and maintain information about various vulnerabilities present in the information system. Well, in the vulnerability management life cycle concept, we need to understand this is a life cycle which is an important process that helps identify and remediate security weaknesses before they can be exploited. So this includes defining the risk, postures, and policies for an organization, creating a complete asset list of systems, scanning and assessing the environment for vulnerabilities and exposures, and taking actions to mitigate the vulnerabilities that are identified. So the implementation of vulnerability management lifecycle helps gain a strategic perspective regarding possible cybersecurity threats and renders insecure computing environment more resilient to attacks. So the vulnerability management should be implemented in every organization as it evaluates and controls the risk and vulnerabilities in the system. So the management process continuously examines the IT environment for vulnerabilities and risk associated with the system. So organizations should maintain a proper vulnerability management program to ensure overall information security. And along with that, yes, vulnerability management provides the best results when it is implemented in a sequence of well organized phase, as you can see that on my screen right now. So first, let's talk about pre-assessment phase. So pre-assessment phase where you will have a process where you need to identify and understand business process. You need to identify the application and data services that support the business process. Then you need to identify the approved software drivers and basic configurations. Then we can create the inventory of all assets and prioritize rank critical assets. Then we can understand the network architecture and map the network infrastructure as well. Then we need to identify the controls already in place. Then we can understand policy implementation and standards compliances, defining the scope of the assessments, and the last, creating the information protection procedures to support effective planning, scheduling, coordination, and logistics. So classify the identified assets according to the business needs. Classifications helps to identify the high business risk in an organization and prioritize the rated assets based on the impact of their failure and their reliability in the business. Right. So prioritization will help you evaluate and decide a solution for the consequences of the assess failing. Then examine the risk tolerance level. Then organized method for prioritizing the assets. So the next phase will be vulnerability assessment. First was pre-assessment phase and second is vulnerability assessment phase, where you will, this phase is very crucial in vulnerability management. So the vulnerability assessment phase refers to the identifying vulnerabilities in organizations, infrastructure, including the operating system, web application, and web servers. It helps the identify the category and critically of the vulnerability in an organization and minimize the level of risk. So the ultimate goal of vulnerability scanning is to scan, examine, evaluate, and report the vulnerabilities in the organization's information system. And vulnerability scan can also be performed or applicable compliance templates to assess the organization's infrastructure weakness against the respective compliance guideline. So the assessment phase involves uh, examine the architecture of the network, evaluating the threats to the environment, performing penetration testing, examine and evaluating physical security, analyzing physical assets, assessing operational security, observing policies and procedure, and assessing the infrastructure's interdependencies as well. So these are the steps which we can follow in vulnerability assessment phase. The last topic of vulnerability assessment concept is post assessment phase, right? So, the post assessment phase, also known as the recommendation phase, which is performed after and based on risk assessment. So, risk categorization is categorized by the key criteria, which helps prioritize the list of recommendations. So, the task performed in the post assessment phase includes the, you can see the creating a priority list for assessment recommendation based on the impact analysis, developing an action plan, then capturing lessons learned to improve the complete process in the future, then conducting a training for employees and so on. So there are four important steps which we need to follow in post assessment phase: the risk assessment, remediation, monitoring, and the verification. So the next topic is vulnerability classification and the assessment types. So any vulnerability that is present in the system can be, hazardous and can cause severe damage to the organization. So it is important for ethical hacker to have knowledge about the various type of vulnerabilities that they can employ, right? Along with various vulnerability assessment techniques. And yes, this is the chart which you can follow for the vulnerability classification. So, vulnerabilities present in the system or network are classified into these particular categories, which you can see that on my screen right now, like misconfiguration, weak configurations. So, it is the most common vulnerability and is mainly caused by human error. So, it allows attackers to break into the network and gain unauthorized access to the system. And misconfiguration may occur both intentionally and unintentionally, and they affect web servers, application platforms, databases, and networks. So attackers can detect misconfigurations through various scanning techniques and then exploit backend systems. So therefore, administrator must change the default configuration of the device and optimize device security, right? So there are a lot of things which you can have a look, like network misconfiguration and host misconfiguration is there. Then you can see the application flaws, right? That is also there, in which you will see the application flaws will be vulnerabilities in the application that will be exploited by the attacker. So yeah, there are a lot of stuff which you can get on the vulnerability classifications. But applications should be secured using the validation and authorized user, right? Because the flawed application pose security threats such as data tampering and unauthorized access to the configuration stores. So if applications are not secured, then the sensitive information may be lost or corrupt. So hence developers must understand the anatomy of common security vulnerabilities and develop highly secure application by providing proper user validation and authorization. So you can see that there are a lot of examples like buffer overflows, memory leaks, resource exhaustions, and so on. Then the third is poor patch management. So the patch management is a small piece of software designed to fix the problems, security vulnerabilities, and bugs, as well as improve the usability or performance of a computer program or its supporting data. Software vendors provide patches that prevent exploitations and reduce the probability of threats exploiting a specific vulnerability. So, unpatched software can make an application server or device vulnerable to various attacks. So, as I have gave you some examples for the poor patch management like unpatched servers, unpatched firmware, unpatched OS, and unpatched application as well. So, these are the examples from the poor patch management. Well, the next one is design flaws. So, vulnerabilities due to design flaws are universal to all operating devices and systems. So, the design vulnerabilities such as incorrect encryption or the poor validation of the data refers to logical flaws in the functionalities of the system that attackers exploit to bypass the detection mechanism and acquire access to the secure system. And the last but not the least, the third party risk, which are the most important because the third party can become another potential threat to enterprises because third party services or products can have access to privileged system and applications through which financial information, customer and employee data and processes in the enterprise supply chain can be compromised. So the third party may be trustworthy, but enterprise usually do not check if they maintain appropriate standards and security measures. Eventually, they can become a threat for the enterprise network, right? Major third party risks include identity theft, intellectual property theft, data breaches, implementation of fileless malware, and network intrusions, something like that. So the organization should be aware of a third party risk and run real time continuous risk management process within the environment, right? So these are some classifications from the vulnerabilities. So the next point is vulnerability assessment tools. So, vulnerability assessment solutions are important tools for information security management as they identify all potential security weakness before an attacker can exploit them. So there are different approaches and solution available to perform a vulnerability assessment. Selecting an appropriate assessment approach plays a major roles in mitigating the threats that an organization faces. So there are approaches, like there are some four types of approaches which we can find out, like product based solution, service based solution, maybe tree based assessment or inference based assessment. So you will find out the solution based on these particular four types of approaches. And specifically, if I just talk about the vulnerability assessment tools, the attacker performs vulnerability scan to identify security loopholes in the target network that they can exploit to launch attacks. Security analysis can be vulnerability assessment tools to identify weaknesses present in the organization security postures and remediate the identified vulnerabilities before the attacker exploit them. So as you can see that there are a lot of tools which you can use. So we can use Qualys vulnerability management system, right? Then you can use OpenVAS, you can use Nikto, right? So there are again there is a tool name is Nessus Professional, GFI, Landguard. Then so there are a lot of tools which we will use for something like for the Kali Linux or maybe the Windows management system. There are also tools for mobile, so you can use Vulner's scanner, right? Vulner's scanner is available for mobile platform. So again, security matrix mobile, which you can use on mobile, right? And I don't think so there are a lot of tools, but yeah, you can use these tools to use in your mobile or maybe the computer laptop systems. And in the end, the last topic of this particular session, vulnerability assessment reports. So in the vulnerability assessment process, once all the phases are completed, the security team will review the results and process the information to prepare the final report. In this phase, the security team will try to disclose any identified vulnerabilities, document any variations, and findings, and include all these in final reports along with the remediations steps to mitigate the identified risk. One more thing which I want to talk about, that the vulnerability assessment reports discloses the risk that are detected through scanning the networks, right? Tools such as Nessus Professional, GFI, LandGuard, and Qualys Vulnerability Management are used for vulnerability assessment. So these tools provide a comprehensive assessment reports in the specified format, and the reports alert the organization to possible attacks and suggest countermeasures. So the report provides details of all the possible vulnerabilities with regard to the company's security policies. The vulnerabilities are categorized based on severity into three levels: high, medium, and low risk. There are some components of vulnerability assessment reports. So the vulnerability assessment reports provide detailed information regarding the vulnerabilities found in the computing environment. So the report helps organization identify the security postures of computing systems such as web servers, firewalls, routers, emails, file services, and so on, and it will provide the solution to reduce the system failures. So the ethical hacker must be careful when analyzing the vulnerability assessment reports to avoid false positives, right? So the assessment reports helps organization take mitigation steps to avoid risk proactively by identifying, tracking, and eliminating security vulnerabilities, right? So yep, that is all about the vulnerability assessment concepts. And now in the next session we are going to perform some vulnerability assessment tools.